Captain Kim Day gripped the armrests of her command chair as the starship Unity drifted toward the glowing planet below. Through the viewport, Veltar looked like a massive jewel floating in space, its surface covered in towering crystal formations that caught and reflected starlight in rainbow patterns. After 3 years of traveling through deep space, they had finally reached their destination. "Captain, we're receiving their transmission," announced Communications Officer Park Jin-woo from his station. His voice carried a mix of excitement and nervousness that everyone on the bridge felt. This was it. Humanity's first real contact with an alien civilization that actually wanted to talk to them. Dai had read the files countless times during the journey. The Kethri were unlike anything humans had ever encountered. They looked like giant insects, but moved with an intelligence and grace that made it clear they were far more advanced than Earth's technology could measure. For 3,000 years, they had controlled this entire sector of space through something called collective consciousness. Every Kethri could share thoughts and feelings with others of their kind, creating a perfect harmony that humans could barely imagine. "Tell them we're honored to accept their invitation," Day replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Behind her professional calm, her heart was racing. Everything depended on the next few hours. If this meeting went wrong, it could mean war between their species. If it went right, it could change the future of both civilizations. The landing on Veltar felt like stepping into a fairy tale. The Kethri had built their cities inside massive crystal caves that sparkled with natural light. The air hummed with a strange energy that made the hair on Day's arms stand up. Everywhere she looked, she saw Kethri moving in perfect coordination. Like dancers who had practiced the same routine for centuries, the formal reception took place in what the Kethri called the Crystal Palace. The room was so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. Walls of pure crystal rose hundreds of feet above them, and the ceiling showed the stars through transparent stone. Hundreds of Kethri filled the space, their insect-like bodies gleaming in the soft light. They all moved together, turned their heads at the same time, and seemed to breathe as one. At the center of it all sat Queen Nixara on a throne made from a single enormous crystal. She was larger than the other Kethri, with 6 arms instead of 4, and a crown-like structure on her head that pulsed with soft blue light. When she looked at the human delegation, Day felt a strange tingling in her mind, as if someone was gently touching her thoughts. The ceremony proceeded exactly as planned. Speeches were made, gifts were exchanged, and treaties were discussed in the careful language of diplomacy. Everything was going perfectly. Too perfectly, Day realized. Every Kethri in the room moved in exactly the same way, responded with exactly the same gestures, and seemed to share the same thoughts. It was beautiful but also deeply unsettling. Then something happened that no one had prepared for. Queen Nixara stood up from her throne and walked directly toward Day. Not toward the human delegation as a group, but specifically toward her. The other Kethri stopped moving. The perfect harmony that had filled the room suddenly felt broken, like a song with a missing note. The Queen's 6 arms were trembling slightly, something Day had never seen in any of the training videos. When she spoke, her voice was different too. Instead of the confident musical tone she had used during the ceremony, she sounded almost nervous. "Would you marry someone like me, human?" The question hit Day like a physical blow. This wasn't in any of the diplomatic protocols. This wasn't supposed to happen. Around them, the other Kethri began making soft clicking sounds that might have been confusion or alarm. Day realized that this moment had moved far beyond diplomacy into something completely unknown and potentially dangerous. The silence in the Crystal Palace stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. Captain Kim, Day stared at Queen Nixara, trying to process what had just happened. The Queen's question hung in the air between them like a challenge that could either unite 2 species or destroy any hope of peace. "Your Majesty," Day began carefully, "perhaps we could speak privately." The Queen nodded quickly, almost desperately. She gestured toward a smaller chamber behind her throne, and Day followed, acutely aware that every eye in the room was watching them. The other Kethri were making those clicking sounds again, and their movements had become jerky and uncoordinated. Something was definitely wrong with their perfect harmony. Once they were alone, Queen Nyxara seemed to collapse in on herself. Her 6 arms wrapped around her body, and the blue light from her neural crown flickered like a dying bulb. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have been learning about your kind for many cycles now," she said. "We intercepted your television signals, your internet communications, your movies and books. At first, the collective mind studied them to understand human weaknesses, but I found myself watching them alone, in secret." Day felt a chill run down her spine. The idea of a Kethri doing anything alone was supposed to be impossible. Their entire civilization was built on shared consciousness and collective decision-making. "I began to understand concepts that have no meaning in our language," the Queen continued. "Personal choice, individual preference, the right to decide, your own fate. These ideas started growing in my mind like seeds, and I could not stop them." The neural crown on her head flickered more violently, and Queen Nyxara winced as if in pain. "The collective knows something is wrong with me. They believe I have been infected by human thoughts. They want to purge these feelings from my mind and return me to perfect unity with our people." "What would that mean for you?" Day asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "It would mean the end of me. Not my body, but everything that makes me different from the others. I would become exactly like every other Kethri, thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same emotions, making the same decisions." The Queen's voice broke slightly. "I would forget what it feels like to want something just for myself." Day began to understand the true weight of what was happening. This wasn't just a diplomatic crisis. It was a revolution of consciousness, happening inside one individual, and that individual happened to be the ruler of an entire star system. "They have chosen a mate for me," Queen Nyxara continued. "Prince Vexkoth of the Northern Hives. The collective mind has decided that our union will produce the strongest offspring to lead the next generation. The ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow." "But you don't want to marry him," Day said. "It wasn't a question." "I do not even know what want truly means," the Queen replied. "But when I watch your human entertainment, when I see your people choosing their own partners based on something you call love, I feel empty. Is this what you humans call longing?" The neural crown sparked, and Queen Nyxara cried out in pain. "The collective grows stronger. They are trying to override my individual thoughts. Soon I will not be able to resist them." Day realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A member of a hive mind species was developing individual consciousness, and the struggle was literally tearing her apart. The Queen wasn't just asking about marriage. She was asking if it was possible to choose love over duty, individual happiness over collective good. "If I refuse the mating ceremony," Queen Nyxara whispered, "it will be seen as an act of rebellion against our entire way of life. The other hives will unite against me. There could be civil war among my people. And if you go through with it, then I will lose myself forever. The collective will make sure I never have another individual thought again." The Queen looked directly at Day with eyes that held more pain than any insect should be capable of feeling. "Your people fight wars for the right to choose. Is that choice truly worth such suffering?" Day felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, like a heavy cloak. Her answer wouldn't just affect these 2 individuals. It would determine whether an entire species could evolve beyond their collective programming, or whether the concept of individual freedom would be crushed before it could take root. The future of both civilizations suddenly depended on what happened in the next few hours. While Captain Kim Day was having her private conversation with Queen Nyxara, Lieutenant Park Hana was making a discovery that would change everything. She had been exploring the crystal corridors of the palace, officially to study Kethri architecture, but really because she was too nervous to sit still. The formal reception had felt wrong somehow, like watching a play where all the actors had forgotten they were supposed to be individuals. As she wandered deeper into the palace, Hana heard something that made her freeze in place. Voices, but not the usual harmonious singing that Kethri used when they communicated as a collective. These were different, hesitant, uncertain, almost human-like. Following the sound, she found a hidden alcove where 5 young Kethri were gathered in a tight circle. They were speaking in whispers, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, completely unlike the smooth unity she had observed everywhere else. When they noticed her approaching, they scattered like frightened children. "Wait," Hannah called softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." One of the young Kethri, smaller than the others with bright green markings on her carapace, slowly approached. "You are the human," she said in broken but understandable English. "We have been watching your videos, your stories." "You speak English?" "We learned in secret. The collective does not know." The young Kethri's voice was filled with fear and excitement. "We discovered your concept of individual thinking. We have been practicing." Hannah felt her heart racing. "Practicing what, exactly?" "Making choices that are ours alone, thinking thoughts that no other Kethri shares. We call ourselves the separated ones." The young alien looked around nervously. "But the collective mind grows suspicious. They say we carry a disease that threatens our unity." Before Hannah could respond, her communication device buzzed with an urgent message from Earth. The text made her blood run cold. High Command was ordering the immediate return of the entire diplomatic mission. They had intercepted reports about Queen Nixara's unusual behavior and considered any romantic involvement between species to be a direct threat to human independence. The message was clear. Captain Day was to break off all contact with the Queen immediately or face court-martial for treason. Meanwhile, Queen Nixara was leading Day through a maze of hidden passages deeper into the Crystal Palace. "These chambers have been mine alone for many cycles," she explained. "The collective believes I use them for meditation and strategic planning. They do not know the truth." When they reached her private quarters, Day gasped in amazement. The walls were covered with images and artifacts from human culture. Screenshots from romantic movies, printed lyrics from love songs, even crude drawings of human wedding ceremonies. In one corner sat a collection of books that had somehow been translated into Kethri script. "I have been studying your concept of love," Queen Nixara said, her neural crown flickering more rapidly now. "In our society, mating is purely biological. 2 Kethri are selected by the collective based on genetic compatibility. They reproduce, care for the young until they are integrated into the hive mind, and then return to their assigned functions." She picked up one of the human books, running her clawed fingers over the cover. "But your species does something extraordinary. You choose partners based on emotional connection. You create bonds that last beyond biological necessity. You call it love. And it seems to make you stronger rather than weaker." Day watched as the Queen showed her more evidence of her secret studies. There were detailed notes about human customs, attempts to understand concepts like dating and marriage proposals, even practice sessions where she had apparently tried to mimic human expressions of affection using her 6 arms. "The collective wants to erase all of this tomorrow," Queen Nixara said, her voice heavy with sadness. "After my mating ceremony with Prince Vexkoth, they will perform what you might call a mental cleansing. All these individual thoughts, all these new feelings, will be removed from my consciousness forever." At that moment, Hannah burst into the chamber, her face pale with urgency. "Captain, we have a problem. Earth is ordering our immediate withdrawal. They think the Queen's proposal is some kind of trap to compromise human independence." Day felt the walls closing in around her. On one side, her own government was treating this unprecedented opportunity for understanding between species as a threat. On the other side, she was watching an entire civilization's chance for individual freedom slip away. "There's more," Hannah continued breathlessly. "I found young Kethri who have been secretly learning about human individuality. They're calling themselves the separated ones, and the hive mind considers them infected with a dangerous disease." Queen Nixara's neural crown began sparking violently. "The purge begins tomorrow," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for all who have been touched by these human ideas. The collective will not allow this infection to spread." Day realized she was standing at the crossroads of galactic history. She could follow orders, return to Earth and watch an entire species lose its chance at individual consciousness. Or she could disobey direct commands and help Queen Nixara and the separated ones fight for something that humans took for granted, the right to choose their own destiny. The weight of that choice was almost unbearable. The crisis erupted at dawn. Captain Kim Day woke to the sound of crystalline chimes echoing through the palace, but these weren't the harmonious melodies she had grown accustomed to. These were sharp, discordant notes that seemed to pierce straight through her skull. Something was terribly wrong. Lieutenant Park Hana burst into her quarters without knocking. "Captain, you need to see this. The Kethri nobles are forcing the Queen into some kind of ceremony, and it's happening right now." Day threw on her uniform and followed Hana through the crystal corridors. The palace felt different today. The usual smooth coordination of the Kethri had been replaced by jerky, agitated movements. Groups of aliens clustered together, their clicking sounds rapid and anxious. The perfect harmony of the hive mind was clearly breaking down. They reached the great hall to find a scene that made Day's blood boil. Queen Nixara stood in the center of a circle of tall, imposing Kethri nobles, her 6 arms bound with ceremonial chains. Her neural crown was sparking violently, and she appeared to be in considerable pain. Prince Vexkoth, her intended mate, waited nearby with what could only be described as cold indifference. Elder Crixmoth, the most senior of the nobles, was speaking in the formal Kethri language, but Day's translator made his words crystal clear. The Queen will submit to the traditional mating ritual. Her individual thoughts will be purged, and perfect unity will be restored to our people. "Stop!" Day shouted, striding into the circle. The Kethri nobles turned to her in surprise, their compound eyes glittering with annoyance. "Human, you have no authority here," Elder Crixmoth clicked. "This is our way. Our Queen must fulfill her biological duty to the collective." "Your Queen is a sentient being with the right to choose," Day replied firmly. "What you're doing is forced mating. In human terms, that's a crime against individual dignity." The word individual seemed to hit the assembled Kethri like a physical blow. Several of them stumbled backward, their neural crowns flickering. Queen Nixara looked up at Day with desperate hope in her eyes. "The concept of individual consent is foreign to us," Prince Vexkoth said in a voice devoid of emotion. "The collective decides what is best for all. Personal preference is a disease that must be cured." "Then your collective is wrong," Day stated, boldly. Around the hall, younger Kethri began to gather, drawn by the commotion. She recognized some of them as the separated ones that Hana had discovered. Every sentient being has the right to choose their own path, including who they share their life with. The effect was immediate and chaotic. The younger Kethri began clicking excitedly among themselves, their movements becoming more individual and less synchronized. The older nobles made harsh, angry sounds as they tried to reassert collective control. But cracks were appearing in their unity. Dr. Lee Minho, the mission's xenobiologist, had been studying Kethri neural patterns since their arrival. He pushed through the crowd to reach Day's side, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Captain, I think I have a solution," he whispered urgently. "But it's incredibly dangerous." "I'm listening." "The Kethri conflict isn't really between individual and collective thinking. It's between forced unity and chosen cooperation. What if we could create a ceremony that combines both concepts? A symbolic marriage that represents the union of individual choice with collective wisdom." Day stared at him. "You're talking about actually marrying the Queen." "Not biologically," Dr. Lee explained quickly. "Symbolically, but it would require neural linking between you and Queen Nixara. You would share consciousness temporarily, allowing both species to understand what the other truly values. The Kethri could see that individual choice doesn't destroy unity, and humans could experience the beauty of genuine cooperation." "What are the risks?" Dr. Lee's expression grew grave. "The neural linking could permanently alter both of your brain patterns. You might retain some Kethri collective consciousness abilities, and she might develop permanent individual thinking. We don't know if either species' minds can handle such a fundamental change." Around them, the chaos was spreading. More young Kethri were breaking away from their elders' control, while the nobles were becoming increasingly desperate to restore order. Queen Nixara was still bound in chains, but her neural crown was now pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost hopeful. "The revolution has already begun," Hana observed quietly. "Look at them. Half the Kethri in this room are thinking independently for the first time in their lives." Elder Crixmoth raised his voice above the din. Enough. The human contamination ends now. Guards, remove these aliens from our sacred ceremony. But when the Kethri guards moved forward, something unprecedented happened. They hesitated. For the first time in their lives, they were questioning orders instead of automatically obeying them. The sight of their uncertainty sent shockwaves through the collective consciousness. "The choice is yours, Captain," Dr. Lee said. "But whatever you decide, you need to decide it now. The old order is collapsing whether we act or not. The question is whether something better will take its place." Dai looked at Queen Nixara, still chained but no longer broken. She thought about the young Kethri who were tasting freedom for the first time, and the terrified nobles who saw their entire worldview crumbling. This wasn't just about two individuals anymore. It was about whether an entire species could evolve beyond their programming, and whether that evolution would bring growth or chaos. The weight of that decision felt heavier than the gravity of 3 planets combined. Captain Kim Day had made her decision, but standing in the medical bay of the Crystal Palace, she was beginning to understand just how terrifying that choice really was. Technician Choi Soo-jin was setting up equipment that looked like a nightmare fusion of human technology and alien bioengineering. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting monitoring devices to organic-looking pods that pulsed with their own inner light. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Captain?" Soo-jin asked for the 3rd time, her hands shaking as she calibrated the neural interface. "We're essentially performing experimental brain surgery on 2 different species at the same time. I've studied Kethri biotechnology for months, but this is completely uncharted territory." Day watched Queen Nixara preparing for the procedure in the adjacent chamber. The Queen's attendants were carefully removing sections of her neural crown, revealing the delicate organic circuitry underneath. Each disconnection caused her to wince, and Day could see tears forming in her compound eyes. "What exactly will happen to us?" Day asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Based on my research, your human neural patterns will be temporarily merged with the Queen's Kethri consciousness network," Soo-jin explained. "You'll experience what it's like to share thoughts with potentially thousands of other minds. Meanwhile, she'll feel what it's like to have thoughts that are completely her own." Dr. Lee Min-ho monitored both subjects from the control room. "The dangerous part is that this kind of neural bridging has never been attempted between species this different. Human brains are built for individual thinking, while Kethri minds are designed for collective processing. We don't know if either of you will be able to handle the other's way of thinking." Through the reinforced window, they could see chaos spreading throughout the palace. Elder Crixmoth was leading a group of traditional Kethri nobles in what appeared to be some kind of military mobilization. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, their collective consciousness working overtime to coordinate a response to this unprecedented threat to their way of life. "They're calling it a contamination," Lieutenant Park Hana reported from her position at the communications station. "The old guard believes that individual thinking is like a virus that will destroy their entire civilization if it's allowed to spread." Queen Nixara's voice came through the intercom, weaker than before but still determined. "The collective is trying to override my individual thoughts even now. I can feel them pressing against my consciousness, trying to force me back into unity. We must proceed quickly, or I will lose myself entirely." Soo-jin finished the final connections and looked at both subjects. "The neural bridge will be established in stages. First, we'll create a basic connection that allows you to sense each other's thoughts. If that's successful, we'll deepen the link until you're sharing full consciousness." Day lay back on the biomechanical bed, feeling alien tendrils make contact with her skull. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It started as a gentle tingling, like static electricity, but quickly became something much more intense. "Initial connection established," Soo-jin announced. "How do you feel, Captain?" At first, Day felt nothing different. Then, gradually, she became aware of something that shouldn't exist. Other thoughts, not her own thoughts, but thoughts that felt familiar somehow. It was like hearing whispers from another room, just at the edge of understanding. "I can sense something," she said, slowly. "It's like background music that I never noticed before, But now that I'm hearing it, I realize it's been there all along. Queen Nixara's voice was filled with wonder. And I feel silence. Not the empty silence of isolation, but the peaceful silence of having space to think my own thoughts. Is this what you humans call privacy? Deepening the connection now, Sujin warned. This is where it gets dangerous. Suddenly, Day's consciousness exploded outward. She was no longer just herself. She was connected to hundreds, then thousands of other minds. The experience was overwhelming and beautiful at the same time. She could feel the collective love that the Kethri had for each other, the perfect harmony of shared purpose, the deep satisfaction of working together toward common goals. But she could also feel their fear of change, fear of losing their unity, fear of becoming isolated and alone like the humans they had observed. For the first time, she understood why the collective mind resisted individual thinking so strongly. To them, individual consciousness felt like death. At the same time, Queen Nixara was experiencing the fierce independence of human thought, the ability to disagree, to want something different from what others wanted, to make choices based on personal preference rather than collective good. It was terrifying and exhilarating. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Lee breathed, watching the neural activity monitors. "They're not just sharing thoughts, they're creating something entirely new, a bridge between individual and collective consciousness that allows both to exist simultaneously." But their breakthrough was interrupted by the sound of crystal walls shattering. Elder Crixmoth and his forces had broken into the medical bay, their eyes blazing with collective fury. "Stop this contamination," he shouted. "You are destroying the purity of our species." Through their shared consciousness, Day and Queen Nixara could feel the approach of the Old Guard's collective will, trying to sever their connection and drag the Queen back into pure hive-mind unity. The neural bridge they had created was under attack, and if it collapsed now, both of them might be lost forever. The battle for the future of consciousness itself was about to begin. The great crystal hall had never seen a ceremony like this before. Ancient Kethri traditions mixed with human customs in ways that should have been impossible, creating something entirely new. Captain Kim Day stood at one end of the crystalline altar, wearing a modified version of her dress uniform that incorporated traditional Kethri ceremonial elements. Queen Nixara faced her from the other end, her 6 arms adorned with both human flowers and Kethri crystal formations. Commander Yoon Jae-sung had arrived from Earth just hours before, his face grim with disapproval. He stood with the small, human delegation, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. "This is madness, Captain," he had whispered to Day before the ceremony began. "You're risking everything we've worked for." On the other side of the hall, Elder Crixmoth led a group of traditional Kethri nobles. Their neural crowns pulsed in perfect synchronization, creating a low humming sound that filled the air with tension. They had agreed to witness the ceremony, but Day could sense their hostility like a physical weight pressing down on the room. Between these two opposing forces, hundreds of young Kethri filled the center of the hall. These were the ones who had been secretly practicing individual thought, and their movements were noticeably different from their elders. They fidgeted, looked around independently, and whispered among themselves in ways that would have been unthinkable just days before. Technician Choi Soo-jin monitored the neural connection between Dai and Queen Nixara from a discrete console near the altar. The biomechanical devices implanted in both their heads glowed softly, maintaining the mental bridge they had established. Through this connection, Day could feel the Queen's nervous excitement mixing with her own determination. "We gather today to witness something that has never happened before," announced Dr. Lee Min-ho, who was serving as the ceremony's officiator. "The union of 2 minds, 2 species, and 2 ways of understanding consciousness itself." As the ceremony began, Day spoke the vow she had prepared, drawing from both human and Kethri traditions. "I promise to honor your individual choices while respecting the wisdom of collective thought. I choose to link my consciousness with yours, not to dominate or be dominated, but to create something new together." Queen Nixara's response was equally powerful. "I choose to share my thoughts with you freely, not because the collective demands it, but because I wish it. I promise to explore the beauty of individual consciousness while maintaining the bonds that connect us all, But as their vows continued, the atmosphere in the hall began to change. The traditional Kethri nobles were no longer content to simply observe. Elder Crixmoth raised his arms, and the other nobles joined him in a synchronized movement that sent chills through every human present. "This contamination ends now," Crixmoth declared, his voice echoing with the power of the collective mind. "The Queen will be returned to proper unity." What happened next was invisible to the human eye, but devastating to anyone connected to the Kethri neural network. The traditional nobles launched a coordinated psychic assault, their combined consciousness crashing against Queen Nixara's individual thoughts like a tsunami against a single rock. Through their neural connection, they felt the attack as if it were happening to her own mind. Thousands of voices suddenly filled her consciousness, all speaking in unison, all demanding conformity and submission. The pressure was overwhelming, like being crushed under the weight of an entire civilization's expectations. "Fight it!" she shouted, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking aloud or through their mental link. "You have the right to choose." Queen Nixara's response came through gritted teeth. "I can feel them trying to erase everything I've learned. They want to make me forget what individual thought feels like." The battle wasn't just happening in their minds. Throughout the hall, the young Kethri were experiencing the psychic assault as well. Some of them began to falter, their newly discovered individuality crumbling under the collective pressure. They moved closer to the traditional nobles, their movements becoming synchronized once again, but others stood firm. A young Kethri named Veltara, one of the first to embrace individual thinking, stepped forward defiantly. "I choose to keep my own thoughts," she declared, her voice shaking but determined. "I choose to be myself." Her declaration sparked something extraordinary. Other young Kethri began to make their own choices, some siding with tradition and others embracing change. For the first time in their species' history, they were literally choosing sides based on personal conviction rather than collective programming. Commander Yoon watched the chaos with growing alarm. "Captain, we need to abort this ceremony. The situation is completely out of control." But Day was beyond hearing him. Through her neural connection with Queen Nixara, she was experiencing the full force of the Kethri collective consciousness. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. She could understand why they valued unity so highly, but she could also see how that unity had become a prison that prevented growth and change. "We can create something better," she said, her voice carrying through both spoken words and mental transmission. "Individual choice doesn't have to destroy collective harmony. We can have both." The psychic battle reached its climax as Elder Crixmoth made one final attempt to sever the neural connection between the two species. But he had underestimated the power of choice. Queen Nixara, supported by her connection to Day's human determination, found the strength to resist. "I choose love over duty," she declared, her words echoing through every connected mind in the hall. "I choose growth over stagnation. I choose to be both individual and collective." The statement sent shockwaves through the entire Kethri consciousness network, reaching far beyond the crystal hall to touch every member of their species across the planet. The revolution had begun, and there was no going back. The wedding ceremony had barely ended when the sound of marching filled the Crystal Palace. But these weren't the harmonious footsteps of unified Kethri moving in perfect coordination. These were the heavy, determined steps of soldiers preparing for war. General Vexiron appeared at the entrance to the Great Hall with a force of military Kethri behind him. Unlike the nobles who had tried to stop the ceremony through psychic pressure, the general represented something far more dangerous: the Kethri military establishment that viewed Queen Nixara's individual consciousness as a direct threat to their species' survival. "By the authority of the Grand Collective," General Vexiron announced, his voice carrying the cold efficiency of military command, "I hereby declare Queen Nixara unfit to rule. Her contamination with human individualism has made her a danger to our people." The general's neural crown was different from the others Day had seen. Instead of the soft blue glow of civilian Kethri, his pulsed with harsh red light that seemed to cut through the air like a weapon. Behind him, his soldiers moved with the perfect synchronization of a military unit, but there was something frightening about their unity. It wasn't the peaceful harmony of shared consciousness, but the rigid control of absolute obedience. "You have no authority here," Queen Nixara replied, though Day could feel her fear through their neural connection. "I am still your queen." "You were our queen," General Vexion corrected. "Now you are an infected individual who threatens the purity of our collective mind. The military council has voted. You will be taken into custody for immediate neural cleansing." But before the Kethri soldiers could advance, another group burst into the hall from the opposite entrance. Admiral Thompson led a squad of heavily armed human marines, their weapons drawn and ready for combat. Day's heart sank as she recognized the cold determination in the Admiral's eyes. "Captain Day, you are under arrest for treason against humanity," Admiral Thompson announced. "You have compromised our species' independence by engaging in unauthorized genetic mixing with alien life forms." Commander Yun Jae-sung stepped forward, his face pale with shock. "Admiral, with respect, Captain Day was following diplomatic protocols. This ceremony was symbolic, not biological. The neural linking makes it biological," Admiral Thompson replied sharply. "Our scientists have determined that this contamination could spread to other humans. Captain Day has been infected with alien thought patterns that make her a security risk to our entire species." Day found herself caught between two advancing forces, each convinced that her connection with Queen Nixara represented an existential threat to their way of life. Through their neural bond, she could feel the Queen's terror mixing with her own, but she also felt something else, the strength that came from not facing this crisis alone. "Stand down, all of you," Day commanded, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even herself. "This isn't about contamination or infection. This is about the right of sentient beings to choose their own path." General Vexion's red neural crown flared brighter. "Individual choice is chaos. It destroys the harmony that has kept our species strong for millennia. You humans have infected our queen with your selfish individualism, and now that disease threatens to spread to our entire population." "And you've infected Captain Day with alien collective consciousness," Admiral Thompson countered. "She's no longer fully human. The neural modifications have made her a hybrid creature that belongs to neither species." The two military forces began to advance from opposite sides of the hall, with Day and Queen Nixara trapped in the center. But as the distance closed, something unexpected happened. The neural connection between the two leaders began to work in ways that neither species had anticipated. Through their shared consciousness, Day could sense the positions and intentions of every Kethri in the room, while Queen Nixara gained access to human tactical thinking and strategic planning. Their combined awareness created a kind of battlefield perception that was far superior to what either species could achieve alone. "Left flank, 3 soldiers preparing to use stun weapons," Day whispered to Queen Nixara through their mental link. "Human marines positioning for crossfire from the upper gallery," the Queen responded, her individual consciousness now enhanced by access to human military training through their neural bond. The young Kethri who had embraced individual thinking found themselves forced to make the ultimate choice. Some fled in terror, overwhelmed by the military confrontation. Others, led by the brave Veltara, positioned themselves between the advancing forces and their queen. "We choose to stand with those who gave us the right to choose," Veltara declared, her voice shaking but determined. Technician Choi Soo-jin worked frantically at her control console, trying to strengthen the neural connection between Day and Queen Nixara. The bond is holding, but barely. The stress of the situation is threatening to sever the link entirely. Dr. Lee Min-ho coordinated the defense of the civilians in the hall, helping terrified Kethri youngsters find cover while monitoring the neural activity of both leaders. Their combined consciousness is creating something unprecedented. They're thinking and reacting as a unified entity while maintaining their individual personalities. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with both military forces hesitating to open fire in such a complex situation, but General Vexion's patience was wearing thin. "Enough," he declared. "The contamination ends now, regardless of the cost." As the general raised his arm to signal the attack, Day realized that this moment would determine not just her fate or Queen Nixara's fate, but the future of consciousness itself. Were sentient beings destined to remain trapped in the limitations of their birth species? Or could they evolve beyond those boundaries to become something greater? The answer would be decided in the next few seconds, as two species prepared to go to war over the right to choose one's own identity. The moment General Vexion gave the attack signal, something extraordinary happened that no one had expected. The young Kethri, who had been learning individual thought, didn't scatter in panic. Instead, they made a choice that would echo through history. They stepped forward to shield Captain Kimday and Queen Nixara, their movements no longer perfectly synchronized, but somehow more powerful because each action was their own decision. "We will not let you destroy what we have learned," declared Veltara, her voice stronger now than it had ever been. Behind her, dozens of other young Kethri nodded in agreement, their neural crowns flickering with the chaotic but beautiful light of independent thought. At the same time, something unexpected was happening among the human forces. Sergeant Kim Bora, who had been part of Admiral Thompson's extraction team, lowered her weapon and stepped away from her unit. "I didn't sign up to shoot people for falling in love," she announced, her voice carrying across the tense hall. "Captain, Day isn't a traitor. She's trying to build a bridge between our species." Several other human Marines hesitated, clearly torn between following orders and following their conscience. The rigid discipline that both military forces had relied on was beginning to crack under the pressure of individual moral choice. Dr. Lee Min-ho, watching from his position near the control console, noticed something remarkable happening to the neural readings. "The bond between Captain Day and Queen Nixara is evolving," he called out. "They're not just sharing thoughts anymore. They're creating a new form of consciousness that can switch between individual and collective thinking." Through their enhanced neural connection, Day and Queen Nixara were experiencing something that neither species had thought possible. They could think as individuals when they needed to make personal decisions, but they could also merge their consciousness into a collective state when coordination was required. It was like having access to two different ways of existing and being able to choose which one fit the situation. "This is what cooperation should feel like," Queen Nixara said through their mental link. "Not forced unity, but chosen harmony." Sergeant Bora had been quietly organizing the humans and Kethri, who refused to fight, creating an impromptu alliance that demonstrated something unprecedented. Humans and aliens working together not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in the same principles. Her tactical expertise combined with the Kethri youngsters' deep knowledge of the palace created a defensive strategy that surprised both attacking forces. "Four mixed teams," Bora instructed. "Humans and Kethri together. Use each other's strengths to cover each other's weaknesses." The sight of humans and aliens fighting side by side, making decisions together while maintaining their individual identities, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't the cold efficiency of military coordination or the perfect harmony of hive-mind unity. It was something warmer and more dynamic, beings choosing to work together because they shared common values. General Vexion watched this unprecedented cooperation with growing alarm. "This contamination is spreading faster than we calculated," he said to his officers. "If we don't stop it now, it will destroy everything our species has built." But when he gave the order to advance, something shocking happened. Several of his own soldiers hesitated. The rigid military conditioning that had kept them in perfect obedience was being challenged by what they were witnessing. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing Kethri who chose to fight for something they believed in, rather than simply following orders. The real test came when Queen Nixara's personal royal guard arrived at the scene. These were elite Kethri warriors who had sworn absolute loyalty to their queen, but they had been trained under the old system where loyalty meant obedience to the collective will rather than personal choice. Captain Zekthar, the leader of the Royal Guard, approached slowly with his weapon drawn. His neural crown was pulsing rapidly, showing the intense internal conflict he was experiencing. "My queen," he said, his voice heavy with confusion and pain. "The collective commands me to arrest you for the good of our species, but my personal loyalty to you commands me to protect you. I do not know which order to follow." This was the moment that would define everything. Queen Nixara looked at her loyal captain, feeling through her neural bond with Day the weight of this choice. She could order him to obey her, using the same kind of absolute authority that the collective had always used. Or she could give him something that no Kethri ruler had ever offered before, the right to choose for himself. "Captain Zekthar," she said softly, "I cannot tell you what to do. The choice must be yours. Do you follow orders because you are commanded to, or do you follow them because you believe they are right?" The Royal Guard captain stood frozen for a moment that seemed to last forever. His neural crown flickered between the red glow of military obedience and the blue light of individual thought. Around the hall, everyone waited to see which path he would choose. When he finally moved, it was to kneel before his queen, not in blind obedience, but in conscious loyalty. "I choose to serve you, my queen, because I believe in what you are trying to create." One by one, the other members of the Royal Guard made the same choice. They were no longer just following orders. They were choosing to protect something they believed was worth fighting for, the right of every sentient being to choose their own path. The rebellion had reached its tipping point, and there was no going back. The moment Captain Zekthar and the Royal Guard chose conscious loyalty over blind obedience, something remarkable began to ripple across the entire Kethri world. The concept that Dr. Lee Min-ho would later call chosen unity spread like wildfire through their neural networks, not as a forced command from above, but as an idea that individuals freely embraced. Captain Kim Day watched through the great crystal windows as the transformation unfolded across the planet below. In cities throughout Veltar, young Kethri were experimenting with this new way of thinking. They would spend part of their day connected to the collective consciousness, sharing knowledge and working together on community projects. But they also carved out time for individual reflection, personal hobbies and private relationships that belonged to them alone. "It's beautiful," Queen Nixara said, standing beside Day as they observed their world changing. Through their neural bond, both women could feel the joy and wonder of Kethri experiencing choice for the first time. They're not rejecting the collective, they're choosing when to be part of it. General Vexiron and Admiral Thompson had both been forced to stand down when their own forces began questioning orders. The sight of humans and Kethri working together harmoniously had planted seeds of doubt in even the most rigid military minds. It became impossible to maintain that cooperation between species was inherently dangerous when the evidence of its benefits was happening right in front of them. 6 months later, construction began on New Harmony, the first interspecies colony in galactic history. The settlement was built in a valley between two mountain ranges on a neutral world, with architecture that blended human engineering with Kethri crystal growing techniques. Every building was designed by mixed teams, and every decision about the colony's future was made through a process that honored both individual choice and collective wisdom. Dai found herself appointed as the colony's first human administrator, while Queen Nixara served as the Kethri representative. But their roles were more symbolic than authoritative. The real governing was done by councils, where both species worked together as equals, making decisions through discussion and consensus rather than top-down commands. "Look at them," Sergeant Kim Bora said one evening, as she and Day watched the colony's children playing in the central plaza. Human kids and young Kethri had created games that neither species could have invented alone, combining human creativity with Kethri collective coordination in ways that were both beautiful and effective. The children were the real proof that this new way of living could work. They grew up speaking both languages, understanding both cultures, and most importantly, they learned that being different wasn't a threat to unity. A human child might spend the morning working alone on an art project, then join a group of Kethri, youngsters, for an afternoon of collective storytelling where they all contributed to a single shared narrative. "They're not choosing between being individual or collective," Day observed. "They're choosing both depending on what the situation needs." The colony's school had become a model that other worlds were beginning to copy. Teachers from both species worked together to create lesson plans that honored different ways of learning. Students were encouraged to think independently and ask questions, but they also learned the value of working together toward common goals. One particularly memorable day, Dai was visiting the school when a young human girl named Kim So-young raised her hand during a history lesson about the revolution. "Ms. Day," the girl asked, "why did some people think it was bad for Queen Nixara to choose who she wanted to marry?" Day thought carefully about how to answer. Because they were afraid that if people started making their own choices, it would destroy the things that kept their society together. They thought unity meant everyone had to be exactly the same. A young Chethri named Klexara, who had been listening intently, clicked thoughtfully. "But we're all different, and we still work together fine. I think unity means choosing to help each other, not being forced to." "That's exactly right," Day said, feeling a deep satisfaction at how naturally these children understood concepts that had taken their parents years to accept. As the years passed, New Harmony grew from a small experimental colony into a thriving city that attracted visitors from across the galaxy. Other species began sending delegations to study this new model of cooperation. The Zephyrian Empire, known for their rigid caste system, started allowing limited individual choice within their hierarchy. The collective worlds began experimenting with giving their citizens individual days when they could disconnect from group consciousness. Standing on the observation deck of the colony's central tower, now 10 years after that first diplomatic mission, Day reflected on how much had changed. Queen Nixara joined her, as she did every evening, their neural bond now so natural that they barely noticed the sharing of thoughts and emotions. "Do you ever regret it?" Nixara asked. "Giving up your purely human identity to become something new?" Day smiled, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded her of both Earth and Veltar. "I didn't give up being human. I expanded what being human could mean. And you didn't stop being Kethri. You just added new dimensions to it." Below them, the colony bustled with life. Humans and Kethri worked side by side in laboratories, markets and gardens. Children played games that mixed traditions from both worlds. Artists created sculptures that no single species could have imagined. Alone. "You know what I think humanity's real gift to the galaxy is?" Day said. "It's not our technology or our fighting ability. It's the idea that every sentient being has the right to choose their own path, that you don't have to accept the limitations you were born with." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Day realized that this was just the beginning. The revolution they had started on Veltar was spreading to new worlds, new species, new possibilities. The future belonged to those brave enough to choose it.